With their speed and range, 3 Mosquitoes hit Berlin at 11 a.m., interrupting Goering's broadcast. At 4 p.m., a second group hit, interrupting Goebbels. For the Allies, it was a major propaganda success.
The Mosquito delivered to the Allies, particularly to the British, propaganda coups right the way through its service history, and all done by a small wooden aeroplane that the Germans had written off in their propaganda as being some sort of antique.
Later, Goering was heard to say, "It makes me furious when I see the Mosquito. I turn green and yellow with envy. The British knocked together a beautiful wooden aircraft that every piano factory over there is building. They give it a speed which they have increased again." But if the Mosquitoes were spoiling Goering's day, the Allies knew that to spoil the Nazis' day, the Mosquitoes were going to have to bomb Berlin again and again until they smashed it into submission. Ever since it went into service, the 400-mile-per-hour wooden Mosquito had been thrown into battle with devastating results. Whatever role it was asked to do, the Mosquito answered the challenge, always ready to take the fight to Hitler's doorstep. By mid-1943, the Mosquito was bombing Berlin on such a regular basis that the missions were known as the Berlin Express. But for the Mosquito crews, nothing was ever just a routine mission.
We would take off after the Lancasters, perhaps 2 hours after the Lancasters had gone. And it was at that time that I really felt lonely.
It was a very lonely feeling. And it was at that point that you could start thinking about what you were doing. You had to rely entirely on the navigator who had radar aids and things like that. But then with the night closing in on you, it suddenly became to realise that you'd left your homeland behind and you were heading for you knew not what.
After 2 hours, the much faster Mosquitoes caught up with the slow, lumbering Lancasters heading for Germany. Flying at 25,000 feet, the Mosquito crews looked down on the procession of bombers 7,000 feet below them.
And then you would probably be treated to a sight you would rather not see, which was the German night fighter force intercepting the Lancasters. I mean, it's true to say that once the German night fighters found the bomber stream, they didn't let go. And they'd be there, hammering away at the flanks of the heavies, and you'd see a sheet of flame as a Lanc caught fire and then blew up. And this would be the melancholy procession to the target and out of it too. It's just awful.
But it was not only the night fighters that they had to get past. Like icy fingers of death, the German searchlights hunted for any Allied aircraft in the sky.
The favourite thing for them to do was to pick up somebody with a searchlight and then fasten all other searchlights onto it. So it was like a moth in a candle flame, and it wasn't very long before you saw brr, 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 one-way tracer going, and then an explosion as a Lanc or a Halifax went down.
Suddenly, the most frightful glare suddenly hit the cockpit, and this blinding light, and I realised what it was, but at the same time, this bloody tracer came shooting past. So I just dived and twisted, and I got out of it.
You could twist and turn if you wanted to, but generally speaking, they would hold you as you twisted and turned, follow you. The way to get out was to dive, so you could do a screaming dive and quickly fly away.
Eventually, the Mosquitoes and Lancasters made it to their target. Having dropped their bombs and taken photographs, they then had to fly back through the searchlights before they reached Britain. For those crews who made it back, the RAF found a way of protecting them from the horrors of war.
People came back shot up, And one thing I did notice about the bomber airfields, of course, no one was ever sick. You never saw an injured man around the place. If people arrived wounded, he'd be quickly spirited away. Everybody next day was there, booted and spurred and smiling. Nobody was dead, or if they were dead, they weren't there anyway.
One squadron did nearly 200 missions within a year, and Mosquitoes bombed Berlin 220 nights in a row. By early 1943, a bigger, badder version of the Mosquito came into service, the fighter and night fighter Mosquito. Now armed with 4.303 machine guns, it could lay down a devastating storm of fire. During early trials, it was found that the flash of the guns was so intense that it momentarily blinded the crews. Modifications overcame this, and because of the grouping of the guns in the nose, Mosquito pilots now had a terrific concentration of firepower. Soon these first night fighters were in action, and with their new radar guidance systems were wreaking havoc on German bombers. The timing couldn't have been better. In June 1944, a new devastating weapon hit Britain. After D-Day, as the Allies were fighting to gain a foothold in Europe, Hitler unleashed his new terror weapon, the V-1 flying bomb. Flying at nearly 400 miles per hour, equal to the Mosquito's speed, and packed with high explosive, the V-1s were aimed at London. Once they exhausted their fuel, they crashed down on an unsuspecting target. Destroying these fast-flying bombs was a dangerous task. Quickly, Mosquito pilots devised ways to take these terror weapons out of the sky.
They would try and get some height and then swoop down on it and shoot it with cannon.
But obliterating a terror weapon could be life-threatening in more ways than one, as one pilot was to find out.
And he squirted at it with his cannon, but he was a bit too close and it flew to bits. And a bit of it came in through the front and pierced the dinghy that he was sitting on. It inflated in the cockpit, so up he came off his seat and up towards the roof. But he was very fortunate. He always carried a dagger down his boot. I don't know if he wanted to fight his way out of Germany, perhaps. He produced the dagger, stabbed the dinghy, and down it went, and he got home. When I heard the story, I was absolutely terrified, and I always carried a knife down my own boot after that, just in case.
Whilst the fighters were attacking the V-1s in the air, their photo recon brothers were scouring France and Belgium, hunting down their launch sites.
As we got near the target, of course, the navigator would alert you to your position. Put your nose down onto towards the ramp and the pillbox, and the pilot would release the bombs. We did, I think, over 3,000 sorties against them, and in the end, Hitler only launched 5,000 of them. And it was an ideal target for the Mosquito. The Mosquito was made for V-1 sites.
After just 9 weeks, the Mosquitoes had destroyed over 650 of these terror weapons. But the Germans were not beaten, and were fighting as ferociously as ever. Once again, as the fighting intensified, the Mosquito would take its crews into harm's way, and go down in history in one of the most daring and ingenious raids of World War II. From its early days, Coastal Command had used Mosquitoes as a vital weapon against harbours, shipping, and vicious German U-boat packs. But by 1944, it had a bigger sting in its tail. Called the Tetsi Mosquito, this aircraft carried a Molin 6-pound cannon with a kick like a mule.
Rate of fire was about 1 every 2 seconds. You could fire it separately, and that's an automated one, 1 every 2, or you fired it